Hey everybody, you're listening to the Equity Playbook, where we break down the hidden messages shaping the world around us today. I'm your host, Caitlin, and today we're going to step into the commentary booth side of things. I usually talk about relationships and everything else on the Black Flows podcast, but we're going to do a little bit something different. Spin off. So, sports. It's everywhere around us, right? But do people actually listen to the sports that are around you when it comes to the broadcasting booth and the stereotypes behind them? Well, if you haven't and you're interested in our talk today, please stay tuned. I have a wonderful guest with me today. Her name is Dr. Latricia Brown. She's the current professor of sociology at the University of Cincinnati. But not only that, she comes from a diverse background where she studied race, and not only race, the sports of race. She has a book who tells it all about the sports, race, and gender. Dr. Brown has a very well background within both. Not only just sports, but also Black women in sports, Black feminism. And today, I'm going to get some of her expertise. So if you all could help me in welcoming Dr. Brown. Okay. So if you would give me a little background intro of yourself and tell me a little bit about what you do.
Sure. So I'm Dr. Letitia Gracia Cardoso Brown. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Cincinnati. I have a bachelor's degree in Africana Studies from the University of Northern Colorado, where I was a McNair Scholar, and I have a master's and PhD in sociology from the University of Texas. My research focuses largely on issues of social inequality through the lens of racism and sexism in the areas of sport, education, and health. My first book, Say Her Name, Centering Black Feminism and Black Women in Sport, came out this March, and it's been really exciting to kind of have my book out in the world. I also have written several journal articles on sports, collaborative and individual. I've written papers on race in the military, on weight bias, on s- uh, the experiences of young Black girls in school. I teach courses like social inequality, the sociology of race, the sociology of W.E.B. Du Bois, and this semester I'm teaching a sociology of sports course.
Wow. I'm I'm listening to sorry. I'm listening to what you're saying, and I know quite a few people from Cleveland that are going to Cincinnati. And I'm like, I'm gonna tell them to take your class because as women, and I know like all of them are Black women.
Oh,
So
lovely.
yeah, it's really like we don't have classes like that at Hampton. So
Oh.
like we have some classes, like the most that I know is it's not even in the sociology department, it's in the psychology department, and it's like
Mm.
Black self-care. But like some of the things that you're saying, like the way the showing like women of like this is yeah, I'm gonna tell them to take your class. Because being from Cleveland, half of Cleveland goes to Cincinnati, so
Yeah, I noticed that.
yeah, I'm definitely gonna tell them to take your class. So um have you ever do you watch sports?
I do.
Okay. Have you ever witnessed a sports commentator saying something derogatory or something not kind of natural in a way towards players? So let's take example. They'll call a white player, oh my God, he's so intelligent and he's this, or she graduated at the top of her class and this. But then they'll say to a black player, oh, they're naturally gifted. Like they'll just have this talent. So how do commentators fix this bias if it could be fixed?
Yeah, I mean, first they need to acknowledge that they are biased. And that's like the very first step is like the realization that the comments that you're making are based on implicit biases. We live in a social world that hampers people that are racialized as Black, especially in the area of sport. We're considered natural athletes. not intelligent enough. And that's one of the reasons that there have been such a shortage of black quarterbacks in football. And you notice it especially in sports like football, where they talk about players' athleticism versus like leadership skills and intelligence. But we know that sports, especially for women and girls, builds leadership skills and intelligence. Like a majority of women that are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies played sports at some time in their life. But, we live in a world where our race and our gender shape the way that we're perceived by others. And because the majority of sports commentators are white and male, the comments that come are read through that lens. If we had more sports commentators that were black and or women, like the dialogues would change
Mm,
because our understandings of the social world are different than those of white men.
wow. That really just resonated with me because it when I'm researching my project, I feel like a lot of people are saying now when I'm interviewing, oh, I don't see that racial biases as much. And I'm like, are you sure? Because I can pull up a video from last week's game that, says that. But you're actually signing light like it's still happening and it's something that needs to be fixed right away. And it's something that isn't being fixed. So, one of my other questions that I wanted to ask you was how do sociologists define racial biases within the context of sports media and commentating?
Hmm, that's an interesting question. Well, race we recognize as a social construction, and race really isn't the problem. The problem is racism. Racism is what drives these biases in the first place, like, and especially like anti-blackness, because, sports were created as like this domain where men were supposed to perform masculinity. And early sports in the US context were for white men. And then, the integration of sports shifted the conversation. Like Dr. Ben Carrington, the author of Race, Sports, and Politics, who's also a sociologist, talks about Jack Johnson in 1908 and how his victory over the white Canadian Tommy Burns like shifted and created this notion of the black athlete as hypermasculine, hypersexual, um, violent. And so like those same traits have been like superimposed onto the way that we discuss black women athletes. So you'll often hear people talk about like Serena Williams or Caster Semenya or other black women athletes as being more masculine than their white female counterparts. So when we think about racial bias in sports, like we look at it through the lens of history and the social cultural world and how anti-blackness especially shows up in the remarks that people make. And even though our society is not just black and white, like we definitely know it's not, a lot of the issues that exist in sports are often coded as black versus white. And it's just like, it's interesting to me, the same characteristics that people love about black athletes, like being strong and fast on the court, are the same things that get us killed by police. Like George Floyd was an athlete in his youth. And it's just like you loved him being big and strong when he was playing sports, but just walking down the street, he's a threat. So, there are a lot of things to take into consideration.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. When I watched a video the other day, and I think it was Texas A&M getting called out as a white police officer was kind of mocking the black player for Texas A&M and like bullying him and like moving him out the way, and then he got relieved of his duties for the game.
Yes.
That definitely like shined a light when you said George Floyd, and I just thought right back to that, and I'm like, see, this is a prime example of like it's still happening. Like it can happen in the sports world, and when it comes to it's a problem in commentating, but it's a problem everywhere.
Hmm.
So, excuse me. When it comes to how do you differ? Like, how do you pick someone that is not racist? You can't go in an interview and not know someone's not racist. They have to show you that. because they're taught that and they're taught to hide certain things. Um, and so when it comes to commentating, do you think they're taught that? Or do you think that they are just saying what the first thing that comes to their mind is?
Mm. I think often people say what's on their mind first without thinking. And, most people don't understand that they have internalized like biases and they don't recognize it because nobody wants to live and be called a racist. But it's like you have to check your privilege, and most people don't check their privilege. And like most of us have at least like one area of privilege in our lives. Like no one is wholly, privileged and no one is wholly like oppressed. Like I'm Black, I'm a woman, like those are definitely forms of oppression, but I also have a PhD and that is a form of privilege, right? And so I check my privilege and I check my biases, but I don't think that most people are trained to do so. And when it comes to commentators, because there's so little diversity, the same kind of dialogues will keep happening. Like, unless we diversify that space, like nothing is really going to change.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Unless we die, yeah, because how can you go from you know go on a network and the network let's like you most sports, especially most watch sports nowadays, have majority Black athletes. We're talking about majority Black quarterbacks in the football industry now. We're talking about the NBA is majority Black. And those are watch sports. And baseball is getting up there. It's not as much prone up there, but it's getting there. So how do you like when someone's the majority, how can you make them feel like the minority is
But
what
see, that's the rub, right? Like they're the majority on the field. They're not the majority of coaches. They're not the majority of administrators. They're not the majority of owners. So like it's a very different place. Like and people often talk about, especially football, as kind of like a reinterpretation of the plantation. And it really is. The majority of the people that were working the fields, and we're going to say that those are the athletes, were Black, but the people that were running those people were white. And so so that's why those are the comments. And it's like until people recognize their biases and challenge their biases and are open to learning different ways about talking about people, because it's not just like racialized comments, like there are a lot of sexist and misogynistic comments that come from sports commentators, again, because they're mostly male. And so like while Black athletes are a majority, when it comes to other aspects of sports, they're still very much a minority.
mm,
And that's the rub.
yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's making me think more into the story. So my next question is, as a sociologist, like how do sociological theories kind of, let's say the critical race theory, let's take that for example, help us understand racial biases in sports commentating?
Hmm. Well, critical race theory begins with understanding that race is a social construct. It teaches us to listen to the stories that people have, the narratives that people tell. Critical race theory is meant to engage thought on a higher level because it comes out of like legal scholarship, right? So
Mm,
it's definitely like law based. And the reason I think people like fear critical race theory is because they don't actually know what it means.
mm,
And so theories like critical race theory, Black feminism, think about sports through that particular lens. Like when I wrote my book, it's a Black feminist perspective on sports. So I talk specifically about the experiences of Black women. Critical race theorists write about race and racism and the ways in which those are drivers of continued inequalities and how those inequalities show up in various spaces, including sports. Like there are critical race scholars within the sports space, and they're not just sociologists, because a lot of the people who do work on sports are like in sports management and sports administration, because there are not really sociology of sport jobs, right? Like when I went on the job market, there wasn't a sociology of sport job. I was applying for jobs in the area of race and or gender. And so, like, I am a race scholar who happens to study sports
Mm.
rather than a sports sociologist proper. But in the areas of sports management and sports administration, and I think that a lot of those scholars also have like a sociological lens
Hmm.
to the approach of sport and thinking about like issues of racial bias and not just implicit bias, but also like overt and out racism because it exists.
Right. Um, so do you think, or yeah, I'll say, do you think that commentators give more credit, black, white, we can say, because the world of commentary, you're starting to see more athletes go into it, especially sports, which is it's making it better, but it's not there yet at all. Because when I look at Sunday, Fox Sunday, there's two black men up there, Michael Strahan and I forget the other guy's name. And then when I'm looking at Monday Night Football, I think it's one black person. I don't even think it's one black person at that desk. And then you have the people on the sidelines, which are usually women, and the only black person I see is Pam Brown. She's been in the game for years. Great commentary. But when are there going to be more athletes? Like NBA is doing this, and I'm kind of thinking about the NFL perspective right now. NBA is doing this when I'm seeing Malika, when I'm seeing Candace Parker covering stuff, and when I'm seeing Taylor Rooks covering stuff. But the NFL, it's so based on like it's like a male such dominated sport, and I'm like because we just got the first female coach, and she's not a full like she's like a backup to backup type of coach, and then you only have three, not even, I think two female refs in the whole entire NFL. As
Mhm.
many games that gets played each week, and you only have two women who can officiate, and then on top of that, the men that play the ball, when they get a call by that female woman, I look at things and I'm like, they're pissed at her and they're in her face. And that happens in the NBA too. But they don't do that to men and they get away with that.
Mhm.
And that needs to be looked at too as the gender part of it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because how can you let someone get away with that? You find people for little tussles and kicking them out the game, but let a female ref kick someone out the game, the fans will go crazy. The commentary will be like, "Well, I don't understand why she kicked him out. She could have just gave him a tech and went on with the day." And then you have the players and the coaches. The coaches cuss them out, and I'm not saying like coaches don't cuss out male referees, but there's a thing with respect between male referees and female referees.
Oh, definitely, because we're socialized to believe that sports is the purview of men and that women don't know nearly as much as men do about sports, even though women have been participating in sports for centuries.
Exactly. So, with the media, how does institutionalized racism or institutional racism
Mhm.
within the media shape cultural norms of commentary?
Yeah, I mean, we continue to have the same people making comments, and these are the comments that we see in the media that are upheld because the thing about racism and sexism is that they're so deeply embedded into our institutions that they seem natural and normal. Like it seems natural that you would be more upset with a woman ref than you would with a male ref because what could she possibly know about the sport, right? because those are the beliefs that we've been socialized to have. And so until we're challenging like these ingrained ideologies, like nothing is going to shift. The media perpetuates like this idea that, for instance, that Black people are more criminal than other groups. And it's always a conversation of Black on Black crime, right? But the thing is that people commit crimes based on proximity. But nobody ever talks about white on white crime, right? Like white people kill white people, Asian people kill Asian people, Black people kill Black people because we tend to harm the people that we're in proximity with. And we tend to live in very segregated areas still, even in the US. But we don't hear about the others because in our society, criminality is associated with Blackness. When we think about like people that are talking about welfare, people don't think about the ways in which corporations get subsidized and are essentially like the biggest welfare holders in the country. They talk about Black women using the system to like eat crab legs or buy these bags and it's just like, well, corporations get more subsidies than Black women who are on welfare. And the majority of people that are on welfare are not Black, they're white. Like Black people are only 13% of the population. Like we're not like, and we've been 13% of the population since like enslavement. And yet there's always these conversations about like Black people have so many kids, this and that. And I'm like, but like we're like not doubling our population. Like we're staying stable. Like, what do you mean? But it's all about like socialization and the things that we've been taught to believe are true.
Mm. So, how does racial biases in commentating contribute to racialized fan behavior? So, like the booing, the online harassment, and because we have TikTok now, so that's a thing where they're gonna stitch themselves over that video and be like, "Yeah, I agree with what this commentator said." So, like, how does that contribute?
Yeah. I mean, since commentators are looked at as like the authority, of course that's going to influence the way that others perceive the game and the athletes. And because of the advent of like social media, where people feel like they can do and say anything because they have a form of like anonymity, it becomes easy to do. And, like the WNBA has been growing in popularity, even though, there have always been people that watch the sport. And what happened when it was growing in popularity? Men were out there throwing dildos on the court, right? Because it's their way of like trying to break down the women that are playing the game and to humiliate them because there's this idea that they don't belong in the sport anyway, or that if they're in the sport, then they must be a lesbian, which is like fine. People are queer in the WNBA, people are queer everywhere, but at least the WNBA is a safe space for people to be queer. Like the NBA isn't a safe space for people to be queer. The NFL isn't a safe space for people to be queer, because our larger society isn't a safe space for people to be queer, right? And so there are so many reasons, but fan behavior is driven in part by the comments that people make. It's also driven by like the messages that they receive in the media from these people. And if the message is, white players are smart and Black players are athletic, then those are the things that people are going to believe. In
Mm,
the media, because it's so much in our face, like because every phone, like it's everywhere. And it's hard to kind of like ignore those messages when they're literally in your pocket.
right. So, what incentives or pressures discourage commentators from addressing issues of race directly?
I think it's because there's this belief that like sport is a meritocracy and that everybody has an equal opportunity and that we're trying to keep it like a neutral space, neutral, but it can't be a neutral space because it exists in our society. And so it is shaped by the larger forces of our society, including racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia. And so, we can't separate sport from the rest of society because it doesn't exist that way. As long as the as long as humans are playing sports, it's going to be, shaped by these larger social forces because humans live in the social world. And so they're impacted by the things that they see, read, hear, learn. And it's like the dismantling of DEI and kind of like the erasure of programs like women and gender studies or Africana studies. Like when those things disappear, everything will get worse because now we don't even have the opportunity to learn the truth and the history and to understand because we can't make change if we don't admit that there's a problem in the first place.
Mm-hmm. That is true. That is so true.
But there's just this belief that like if we don't talk about it, then it won't exist. And I'm like, that's not how racism works. That's not how it works. Like not talking about it isn't gonna make it go away. It's not how that works at all.
Yeah, I've heard that growing up in the suburban part of Cleveland. Like, I've heard that a couple times, and it's like, is it? And I'm really big on like racial talks. Like, all of my papers and the things that I cater to and I write are about like discrimination and race because I feel like people downplay the things. Like nowadays they're like, oh well, black people are gonna take over the population. It's only 13% of us. Like you said, it's been 13%. And what's wrong if we do take over the population? It's about that racism carrying on for generations and generations. Like, do you believe that it's taught? And because I know some people are like, well, racism is, they're like, it's not taught and you have to learn it on your own. Well, how do you learn how to eat? How do you learn how to bathe yourself? You teach your kids that. You can't teach somebody to be racist. You can't teach somebody to look at somebody different because of disability, gender, or the color of their skin. So I think that's like a problem in the world too, especially when it comes to those type of things. Like, okay, that's kind of weird. Um, and I'm thinking right now because so I'm thinking about football and how I'm a Cleveland Browns fan. So I always thought that the Shador situation was racism. You mean to tell me a man who's projected to go a third round pick in the NFL draft? I mean, third overall pick in the NFL draft falls to the fifth round, and people are like, "Oh, it's because of his dad." No, it's because of racism, and they don't want black people to be in charge of certain things. Like there's not one single person that is black that owns an NFL team. There, if I'm thinking right, five black head coaches. If I'm thinking right, not even. I don't.
I don't think five seems like a lot.
Yeah, I don't think it's five. Maybe
No,
three.
maybe three. I think it's three.
And there are 32 teams. People don't think like that, but behind the scenes, who's teaching these people how to do these certain things? The black coaches that are quarterback coaches, that are running back coaches, and that definitely plays like a huge mechanism in the racism part. So how can athletes themselves play roles? Or let me rephrase that. What role can athletes play in shifting commentary norms?
Well, first they need to be aware of it and what's happening and what's going on and why the comments are that way. Like it's it's education. Like it comes down to education. Like we have to educate people on the realities of racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia in order to shift those dynamics. There needs to be people that have these dialogues and conversations with the players to even get them to think about this as a reality. because not every player does. Like some players are definitely socially conscious, but then they've seen what happens when you're socially conscious, right? Like Colin Kaepernick lost his entire career because he was socially conscious. But I also think that, people like Maya Moore stepped away like willingly in order to pursue social justice. So I know that there are athletes that do take it seriously, like Natasha Cloud, Brittany Griner, people who really care about larger social issues. And so getting athletes to care is like the first step. And to understand and having them understand that the ways in which they're being talked about are racialized experiences. Because we don't always want to believe that what's happening is because of race or racism, because it's just like still like we're still doing this, and it's like, yeah, it never stopped. Like it's going away, and now we've gotten into a moment in which people are saying like the quiet part out loud. Like they're really just like saying it with their full chests because we are under an administration that allows it to happen. People are losing their jobs in academia for standing up for their beliefs, for being pro-Palestine, or for being culturally, socially conscious. Like students are recording their students talk or their teachers talking about race and racism and ways to try and get them fired. Like it's a very scary time. And
Mhm.
I know that like for me as a Black woman who is not tenured yet, like I worry, but I'm not gonna stop doing the work that I'm doing because I believe that the work that I'm doing is important and necessary. And so I will do it for as long as I can.
Yeah, that definitely is a perspective that I feel like people don't look at in that sense. So, my last question for you is going to be, how can journalism, well, I would say journalists because most commentators go for journalism. So
Mhm.
how can journalists or journalism professors, I should say, teach these people how to actually go about commentating the right way without any biases, without any racism in anything?
I mean, like prejudice and discrimination will always exist. But I do think that by engaging students with different types of, you know, materials, like having students read about race and racism in journalist classes, like talking about race and racism in journalism classes and the way that it shows up in the media. Like if the conversations aren't being had, nothing is going to change. But I do believe that education is a powerful tool to shift narratives. And so by exposing students to different perspectives, so not just focusing on like white men or white women, but focusing on like a range of people with a range of identities is a way to start making those changes at like in the classroom area, like encouraging journalism majors to take courses in sociology and other fields that are having these conversations about race and racism also, I think is necessary.
Mhm. Your expertise is like really really helpful for this side of my project because, like I said, I feel like I've gotten a lot of, well, it doesn't, like, I haven't really seen it myself. Like I interviewed an NFL player and he was like, I haven't really seen it myself, and I'm like, you went to Ohio State, you haven't seen it? He was like, no, and I'm like, okay. Which I know Ohio State can get a little. I'm from Ohio. We know Ohio State can get a little racist at times. So I interviewed him. I interviewed a coach, and I've interviewed all Black people. Well, I've interviewed a couple of players at my university that were white, but they were saying they were taking different routes. Like, well, I really haven't seen it, but I'm like, I know this exists somewhere. Like I know I'm not crazy. Like it
Uh,
exists in articles I read, and like you're telling me that it exists, and you've literally written books about this type of thing, in a sense, and
One
about
book,
how,
but more books to come.
yes, um, like it definitely exists. So I really do appreciate your expertise because I definitely am going to use this in my video and podcast part. I think people need to realize like they're you gotta think about it not from what you see because us as black people, we could be blind to something really, really easily.
Hmm.
And I think they need to think about, that point of view. But I really do appreciate you so much. And I definitely am gonna recommend everybody your classes and your book. I'm definitely gonna buy it because I really want to read it. And I'm want to work in sports communications for NBA team.
Nice.
So that I feel like your book would really help me into the career field that I want to go into.
Oh, I love that. I wish you the very best.
Thank you so much. And yes, thank you and have an amazing day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Equity Playbook. Racial biases in sports commentating isn't just a media problem, it's definitely a cultural one. And change starts with awareness. The words you use, the words we use, and the words everybody uses matter because they create narratives. You don't want narratives out there around about you. So calling out these biases takes one step further. Please enjoy your day today, guys. Bye.